the evidences of the Book of Mormon. Some of you probably never heard of it, and some of you will remember the things that you learned in the past. To give you some background, when the Europeans, when they came to the Western Hemisphere, they didn't think that the people living here were humans. Columbus thought they were Indians from India, and I don't know why some of the people that came here thought that way. That they debated it and notified the Vatican, and they had to get involved, trying to determine whether or not these people were humans. And they passed a smoke up. That's what they do in the Vatican, and they admitted that they were humans. Some of the people thought they were savages, and they still wouldn't let them enjoy the communion or become priests, and they took advantage of these people. They burned all their archives. There was a place in Manny that had a royal archive there. It destroyed all the histories and all their genealogy and religious beliefs, and it was a very sad commentary. What I'm going to do, introduce you to a man. This is his name. Don't ask me how to pronounce it. Ixtlilxochitl, the grandson of the last ruler among the Aztecs. And he had access to the archives, what was left over, through his family. And I'm sure that not all the public archives that were destroyed, the private ones were available for a few years. Now, Ixtlilxochitl, he wrote 13 manuscripts. They were not translated into Spanish till 1892. And in 1965, they were translated into English and finally made available to the general public. What he put in his manuscripts was astounding. I got most of my information from Milton R. Hunter, who was a 70, and he wrote a book, Ancient America and the Book of Mormon, and he had bits and pieces of the 13 manuscripts that were translated in 1965. Now you must remember, this is 135 years after the Book of Mormon was published. And I will read to you some of the things that he recorded in his manuscripts. He wrote about 3 groups of people coming to the Western Hemisphere. As you know, we had the Jaredites come early, and then we had the Mulekites and the Nephites, and Ixtlilxochitl called them the ancient ones, the giants. The second group he called Toltecs, and the third group he called Olmecs. And he recorded that the first group who came, they came from Tatari, the land of Babylon. They came from the Tower of Babel. And how many of you have had a chance to read this book? I think you're the only one.
She did.
But anyway, in the Book of Mormon, as you know, if you read the first chapter in Ether, Jared bothered his brother and told him to ask the Lord not to change the languages. And he asked him a second time, go back to the Lord, and to ask him not to have their friends' language changed. And then the third time, they wanted to be put in a place where they could live in peace. Well, Ixtlilxochitl wrote in his manuscript that the ancient ones, he called them also giants, they came in 7 families with their wives, and their language was not changed. And I thought this was significant. There was remember Balboa? He discovered the Pacific Ocean. They found out that there was an ocean on the other side of the continent. Well, he had a relative who, oh, here it is. I'm all nervous. I haven't had that many people in my house since all my kids left. Okay, this guy's name was Miguel Cabello Balboa. He was a Catholic priest, and he was a great nephew of Balboa. And he had an obsession. He was really interested in the history and the origin of the people who lived here, and he wrote about as he encountered the natives. He found out that these people insisted that they came from the Tower of Babel, the early ones, and that their language was not changed. So you have not only Ichichojidl, but also you have Balboa, who claimed that these people' language was not changed. I got all excited about that, and I started looking for more. This was one evidence. I have 40 evidences. These are parallels that Joseph Smith somehow invented, and he wrote it in his book. Okay. One of the claims was that these 7 families, they crossed many lands and seas. And Hugh Nibley in his book talks about the same thing. These people had an understanding. There's 47 tribes in America. They all believed that there was a deluge, a giant flood. And he also wrote about the first settlers who were giants. They were destroyed in the North Country, and their bones were found all over that place. The second settlers he called Tulticas, and they witnessed the decline. They met some of the giants. Does that ring a bell? Remember the Mulekites when they came here? They ran into Coriandamer, and a few years ago I met an individual who had a patriarchal blessing saying that she was a descendant of the Jaredites. We know for a fact that there were 2 people alive when the Mulekites came here, the prophet Ether and Coriandamer. But there were other survivors that are not mentioned in the Book of Mormon. They called their land the land of abundance, which could be interpreted to mean the land of bountiful. The Tulticas, they were known as artisans, wise men, great carpenters. They were in the silversmithing, mechanical arts, weaving, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And they wrote a history, their religion and the history on codices. And they kept calendars. They were highly skilled in jewelry. I have a book that's as thick as this that talks about the jewelry that they discovered. The explorers, when they came here, they found life-size gold animals and men and women. And the Spaniards melted it all down into bullion and sent it over to Spain. They had brass armor and helmets and weapons. Let's see. This book here, it took me 35 years from about 50 to 60 books. And I took out bits and pieces about the kind of weapons that they had, and I have photographs. If you're interested in the weapons, you can go through that book. They had swords and all kinds of weapons of war. They had a tendency to name the lands that they explored after their leaders. Does that remind you of the Book of Mormon? And Ichinochitl says these people were white and they were bearded. And they had an understanding of all the Old Testament stories, Adam and Eve, the origin of the first man, how they multiplied. And then he talked about how one day the sun stood still. That was in the year 4779, which is after the creation. And in Helaman chapter 12, 7 to 15, it talks about the sun standing still. There was also a tremendous upheaval. If you read the third chapter in Nephi, the third Nephi chapter 8, you find out that there were cataclysmic events that took place, and it changed the whole surface of North and South America. This is a picture I got from a lawyer. His name was Jack West. He wrote several books, and I wrote a letter to him when he used to be alive. And I don't know if he's still alive or not, but he made many frequent trips to Central and South America, and he took 5,000 slides. And I told him I'd like to have these slides, and he sold me a film strip and about 115 slides, and this was one of the slides. Now what this is, I'll pass it around so you can look at it. This is a picture of an elephant tusk and a mastodon tusk and a whale, the skeleton of a whale. This was found in La Paz, Bolivia, 12,000 feet above sea level. It's impossible for animals, elephants, to live there. The grazing they would have starved to death, and they have no idea how a whale got up there. But I have many stories like that from all over North and South America. When they look for dig for wells, they find the bottom of the forest with gigantic tree stumps, 80 to 120 feet below the surface. And here's an example where they found a tree below a coal bed in Northern America. This is just one picture. I have a whole book full. And the reason I mentioned this, he talked about there was this tremendous cataclysmic upheaval. People were carried away by whirlwinds, and they suffered earthquakes, and mountains were removed. Where there were mountains, valleys appeared, and vice versa. And especially in North America, was completely changed. And the geologists will tell you that this happened 10 million years ago, okay? Jack sent me this picture. This is a picture of the Andes in Peru. You can pass the picture around if you want to. And for about 150 miles on this picture, it's all terraced, and nobody lives there. And at one time, they were able to grow crops here, and there's no water there now. So they believe that the Andes were pushed up. Now, what got to me is I collected from various institutions when the Ice Age took place. I got about 20 different schools of thought of where when the some people believe there were 6 ice ages and they gave them names. Some of them think there was 4, and none of them agree on the last ice age. When some of them say it was 5,000 BC, some of them say 8, some of them say 11, 12, and none of them agree. And this is from the Encyclopedia in North American History. They think it was between 9,000 and 5,000 BC. And these are all from various academia, from universities, and the leading scholars, and then none of them agree. They only agree on one thing. There was a terrible destruction that took place on this Western Hemisphere. The Book of Mormon, Ichinojuchitl says that these people build highways. Well, here's a highway, and it's completely, a mountain rose up right in the middle, and these highways are made out of cement, and they predate Portland cement by 1,000 years. They in some parts of the Western Hemisphere, they used a lot of cement. And this picture reminds me when Rosemary and I invited Professor Harvey Taylor to our house. And my missionary companion and I visited him in Litchfield, Illinois. He was an anthropologist, and he had a similar picture of the one I'm passing out here. It showed a highway running for 100 miles, made out of cement, and then stopped, and it continues a quarter mile away, 1,000 feet down. So it gives you an idea of the extent of the terrible upheavals. And I wanted to get that picture from him. I talked to him twice, and he wouldn't let it go. And he was a professor at SIU, Southern University of Illinois, and he used to be a branch president with the Mormon colonies in northern Mexico. And he told us, he was a very educated man, and he told us that he used to go through the jungle with a machete looking for lost cities, and he had a bones, he called it the Olmec instead of Ulmtec, a bone of a giant which was twice as big than a normal size hand. And he showed me the bone. We had him in our house in Catawissa, and then we visited him in Litchfield. A few years ago, I took my kids to Nevada, and you'd see these pictures about these giant sea creatures, and you wonder, is this for real? Well, there's a town, it's a ghost town in Nevada, it's called Berlin. Apparently there was some Germans who did some mining there, but they found 5 species of this creature, which are a lot bigger than I had Sarah stand in front of the size of this thing. He had an eyeball 1 foot in diameter, and they had a coral reef there that was a quarter mile long and 60 feet high. See, I got some of my kids are right there. And this is in the middle of the Nevada desert, and 7,000 feet above sea level. It's really weird. And they found this fish in Kansas, and he swallowed another fish. It was 5 feet long, and this is in the middle of Kansas. And if you like, you can look through this book. There were gigantic inland seas that dwarfed the Lake Superior and the Great Lakes. They were all over North America. So the land completely changed. That's the point I wanted to make. Here's a highway that runs 125 miles directly from the north to the south. They excavated some temples here, and they have to re-excavate them every 7 years because the jungle grows like crazy. These people did have an understanding of cement. And by the way, if we abandon our highway, Interstate 15, for 500 years, there'd be nothing left. These people were skilled. Did you know they had a wall in the Andes that runs right on top of the mountain, and it's 400 miles long, and on top there's enough room for two trucks to drive, and it runs. When they had wars, there were continental wars. It wasn't just villages. This here, I got these pictures. I have a lot more than this. These are pictures from Nebraska. They claim that there was an upheaval here 10 million years ago, and they found all these horses and rhinos. It gives you a map where it's at, and they had camels and all kinds of animals, and they think it happened 10 million years ago, but I think it could have been the year 34 AD. It talks about 7 tribes, and his Ichinochachitl timetable comes to about 350 AD. There was peace for 10 years, and they let one group have the northern lands, and another group took the southern lands. It says that the homeland of the giants was in the Northland. Now, we've been taught in church that the Jaredites landed somewhere in northern America. I thought that was interesting. And he talks about there was peace for 305 years, and then there was a terrible war. And I was reading today in the Book of Mormon. Once Jesus left, they lived in peace and righteousness for several generations, and they prospered. And the Book of Mormon says after 305 years, this is what Ichinochachitl says here in his record, there was a prophet by the name of Amos, and when he died, the people got really wicked, and he turned the records over to his brother Amaron. You remember Amaron? He talked to Nephi, not Nephi, he talked to Mormon when he was a young fella and told him about plates that he hid away, that when he get old enough, he would take them out to preserve the records. And there, another one of the claims was that all the destruction that took place, hurricanes, winds, earthquakes, cities were burned, and some cities were, they wound up underneath the water. Off the coast of Ecuador, there is a city in the ocean. And you probably haven't heard this before, but there's also a city in Lake Titicaca in Bolivia on the bottom of the lake. And let's see what else I wanted to. Oh, he wrote about a time when the sun didn't shine. Does that sound familiar? And he said after they were fighting each other, that one group was banished, and they were chased out of they were sent to the land north. And he talks about there used to be great populations in many cities, and then one day, and that's another fireside, a God appeared. They called him, he was holy and virtuous, and he forbid sin, and he gave laws. And in South America, they call him Viracocha. The Mayans call him Kukulkan, and the Aztecs called him Quetzalcoatl. And when the Latter-day Saints approached me and wanted me to read the Book of Mormon, I said, I don't want to read your book that was written by a church. Can you get me a book written by somebody else that talks about Jesus visiting over here. And this friend of mine, he took military leave, and he didn't have any money, and he hitchhiked from California to Salt Lake, and he got me a book called He Walked the Americas by Taylor Hanson. She was a Canadian and not a member of the church, and she collected all these stories about a God appearing among the forefathers of the Indians in human form. And he did miraculous things, even raising people from the dead, and he was real kind, and he taught them all kinds of things. Well, I read that book, and I said, okay, I'll read your Book of Mormon. And they got me one in German. My English wasn't too good. I don't know how I ever passed the aptitude test to get into the American Air Force. I think they were desperate during the Vietnam War. But anyway, so I read that book twice, and I come to realize, hey, I'm going to have to change my ways. He also said that they came in ships from the Orient. And I mentioned earlier that the Olmecas, they ran into the giants. There was just a few left. They were exterminated. I could go on, and I got a whole book full of stuff here. Does anybody here subscribe to this magazine? It has a picture of American Indian with a copper head plate. These guys were fully armed. They had collapsible helmets that would protect the side, and they had breastplates. This book is full of breastplates and head plates, and in ceramic art, it depicts people with head plates. I thought that was kind of interesting. This guy who owns this magazine, he came here about 2 weeks ago. He bought my books from the Bancroft books. He paid me $2,700. And well, each book is about 800 pages. I read the.
You wanted me to type it.
I read the first 6, and I don't think I'm going to live long enough to read that. But there was Bancroft's dedicated his whole life in researching the forefathers of the Indians, of their origin and where they came from.
I have a question. When you talk about the giants, you're referring to the Nephites were giants, as far as comparing them with the Lamanites, or
The Jaredites they were tall in stature. That's what the book.
Jaredites,
Yeah. I think it was King Limhi and his people. When they went on an expedition, I think they were gone 40 days or something like that. They went to a land of desolation, and they found armor, metal breastplates and helmets, and they brought them back. And they also found a metal record. They say it was in gold, about it talked about their genealogy, and nobody knew how to translate it, but there was a man by the name of Mosiah. He was a leader of the Mulekites and the Nephites. They became one people. They joined, and they handed over the records to King Mosiah, and he had the gift and power of God, using the Urim Thummim to translate that book. And that book is within the Book of Mormon. It's not very long. It's just 16 chapters, but has a lot of good, interesting stuff in there. Things like there's going to be great pollutions in the latter days. And right now, we can't fish in 40% of our rivers. And we're we got city dumps everywhere with trash and everything. The animals are dying in the ocean because of the plastic, and it's just unbelievable. I think Heavenly Father probably shakes his head what we're doing to this planet. You know, he probably cries sometimes when he sees us fighting. I probably read about 50 or 60 books to get each one of these together. When I investigated the church, I was kind of like the doubting Thomas. I think I'll tell you one more story. I used to own a little bookstore. One day a guy came in and he parked his Mercedes in the back, and he looked like a rabbi. He had real thick glasses and he was bearded and highly educated. And he said he wants me to sell one of his books. And he handed me this book. It was called The Gospel of the Great Spirit. And his name was Joshua Moses Bennett. He got 2 Hebrew names and an English name. And he said he wrote this book, and it's about the Lamanite version of the Book of Mormon. And I said, okay, I'll take 3 books. And he kept talking. He was a good salesman. And he said, Hans, I had 2 Mormon missionaries come to my father's house, who was the vice president of Westinghouse in Chicago. And they were Jewish, and they were upset when these missionaries was telling them about the Messiah already came, and he will come again. And so he decided to disprove the Book of Mormon. And he spent the next 17 years going through libraries and talking to Indian elders, and he wrote this book. It's 660 pages. It's so fascinating. I had to read it 3 times. And he converted himself to Jesus Christ. And I said, okay, I'll take a case. And it turned out to be one of my best sellers. And you can still get it in the internet. And I told him we had him here at our house, and I said, you only find this in the Mormon church. They have a kraut like me and a Jew like you sell a book to make a buck. And I took him around to people that I knew, and it was a very expensive book. But he did the same thing as Taylor Hunson, trying to collect all these Indian stories, and converted himself. Next time we meet, we'll talk about all the Indian legends about this God who appeared in the Western Hemisphere. And there's about 30, maybe more, accounts by different tribes that talk about this individual that appeared over here. I'm not very smart, but I love to read, and when I find something, I file it away. Well, I'm looking forward to the Savior promised that he would come back someday. This time he's not going to come back on a donkey. This time he'll come in power and great glory. And you tell people that, they don't even believe in him. They don't believe in this resurrection. They don't believe that he was the Son of God. They think we're crazy for believing that he's going to come someday and he'd be the King of Kings. We have 2 records that testify of him, the Book of Mormon and the Bible, and they both are the Word of God. That's all I wanted to say, unless you got more questions.